Welcome, everyone. Welcome especially to our students, especially our first year and LLM students for whom this may be the first really big law school event that you've gotten to go to voluntarily. Welcome as well to our faculty and staff, to faculty, staff, and students from around Duke, and to members of the greater Durham community. We're delighted to have you here today. It is my great pleasure to introduce some remarkable people to you today. Raymond, Santana, and Yusef Salaam have generously agreed to spend some time with us as part of a two-day event at Duke focusing on wrongful convictions. Mr. Santana and Mr. Salaam were convicted and imprisoned in 1989 when they were only 14 and 15 years old for a crime they did not commit, in a case known then as the Central Park jogger case. They were exonerated by DNA testing in 2001 and have since then become known, along with the three other men exonerated in the same case, as the Exonerated Five. Last night, they spoke at the Page Auditorium to an audience of primarily undergraduate students in a conversation that I understand was very inspiring and interesting, that was moderated by Professor Mark Anthony Neal, chair of the Department of African and African American Studies, who has joined us today. I want to thank Professor Neal for having the inspiration and the idea to bring Mr. Salaam and Mr. Santana to Duke, and for coordinating with us at the law school so that we could provide the opportunity for both law students and undergraduates to hear their stories. We are tremendously honored to have both of them here today. Of course, wrongful convictions are an all too well-known phenomenon, and Duke Law School has been on the forefront for years in doing the difficult and painstaking work it takes to right these wrongs. Our wrongful convictions clinic dates all the way back to 1991, when Professor Jim Coleman developed the first law school death penalty clinic here in the nation, here at Duke. That clinic was incredibly successful and inspired other law schools around the country to launch clinics of their own. In 2006, Professor Coleman transformed the death penalty clinic at Duke Law to focus instead on investigating claims of innocence made by incarcerated felons. And I want to take a moment to recognize the role students played in the launch of that clinic. Students had started their own innocence project and had been agitating to do more work in this area. And so it's really a combination of Professor Coleman's vision, Professor Newman, who joined him as co-director of the clinic, and the passion of students that got this started here at Duke. Professor Coleman and Professor Newman supervised both the Innocence Project and taught the Wrongful Convictions Clinic ever since, and they were more recently joined by Professor Jamie Lau, who joined us from the North Carolina Innocence Inquiry Commission. Together, they have guided generations of law students through investigation and litigation of exoneration cases, and I hope many of you will participate in that effort as well, and some of you probably already are. These cases take years and years to come to resolution. For example, just last May, the clinic secured the release of Ray Finch, who had served 43 years for a murder he did not commit and was 81 years old when he was released. Professor Coleman had worked personally on that case for 15 years, since even before the clinic had been established. And for those of you who during orientation a couple of weeks ago noticed the absence of Professor Teresa Newman during the wrongful conviction session, you might be interested to know that she was busy arguing in court that day for the release of Dante Sharp, a clinic client who served 24 years in prison for a murder he did not commit and has now been released. Professor Newman likes to say that it takes a village to free an innocent man. And indeed, in both of these cases, students at Duke Law School had worked year in and year out, and there is now an entire group of alumni who can each take partial credit for these extraordinary outcomes. I hope that many of you in the room will join that alumni team. In addition to the Wrongful Convictions Clinic, Duke Law is a leader, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say the leader in criminal justice research nationwide. This work includes Professor Sarah Sunbeal's work on prosecutorial discretion, Professor Lisa Kern-Griffin's on the relationship between narrative and factual accuracy in the courtroom, Professor Sam Buell's work on the conceptual structure of white-collar offenses, Professor Nita Farahaney's work on the ethical dimensions of emerging technologies in criminal law, and Professor Ben Grunwald's work on how police who commit misconduct are often hired by new departments. There couldn't be a better place to host a major center for the study of the role in science in the criminal justice reform system. And now I'm extremely proud to announce today something that will be extraordinarily exciting and important for Duke Law and the study and reform of criminal justice around the world: the launch of the Duke Center for Science and Justice. This center will build on our existing strengths to create new opportunities for students and faculty across the university to study and improve accuracy of evidence in criminal cases, the role of risk in criminal outcomes, and the treatment needs of individuals with mental health or substance abuse problems as an alternative to arrest and incarceration. The center will extend our reach beyond the law school to collaborate with faculty and students in medicine, public policy, arts and sciences, to pursue research and take courses. The center's launch is supported by a $4.7 million grant from the Charles Koch Foundation. And we very much hope that additional foundations and individuals will follow the Koch Foundation's example in contributing resources to the center once it begins work. Leading this new center will be the L. Neil Williams Jr. Professor of Law, Brandon Garrett, who will also be our moderator today. As you know, Professor Garrett is a leading scholar of criminal justice outcomes, evidence, and constitutional rights, and the author of several books, including Convicting the Innocent, Where Criminal Prosecutions Go Wrong. And as many of you know, Professor Garrett is also my husband. So this moment is especially exciting for me to get to announce as the dean, because I've witnessed him for years working tirelessly on criminal justice reform research. In fact, before we were married, long ago, when we were living in what now seems like a very small apartment in Brooklyn, but at the time seemed quite cozy, I remember Brandon telling me how excited he was because he got to draft a state court complaint in a case brought by Yusef Salaam. Thank you to all three of you for being here today. Professor Garrett, Mr. Salaam, and Mr. Santana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yusef, Raymond, thank you for taking time away from your families to be here, both yesterday in the evening and today. And thank you to our students. And please be thinking of questions that you want to ask. Because I've promised them that we have some of the most impressive future freedom fighters in the world here at Duke Law School, and that you're going to be asking really, really sharp, interesting questions. And our guests need no introduction. They're great activists, leaders, artists, and voices for social justice. I don't want to say more than that before beginning. What I wanted to do is ask a few questions about where they are now and things that happen in the case, focusing a little bit more on law because, after all, we're here in the law school. And I'm going to pause here and there and look out for questions. If you want to follow up on anything I've said, please do. And then we'll have more time for questions at the end. So I wanted to start with both of you. First, start here in the present and just ask you, today, with the new Netflix series, with the civil case finally at its end, in some ways you're freer than you have been in the past. What are you doing today with the platform that you have and that you're using so well to raise awareness about injustice in the criminal justice system? Just tell us about what you're doing.
So, just quickly, I'm looking for something to share that's going to kind of set the foundation of where I am in my personal journey. In the Quran, I remember I was asked this question about, what's next when we won the lawsuit. Pulled aside and said, hey, what's next? What's going on? You guys can retire now, right? And I kept thinking about this verse in the Quran that I've heard often. And the verse goes like this. It says, Inna ma'al usri yusra fa inna ma'al usri yusra. What that means is, after difficulty there is ease. Surely after difficulty there is ease. So it's the notion that you can kind of just relax. And I think a lot of people stop there. But the reality is that there's another verse after that. And what that means is, So when you are free from your immediate task, still labor hard. And one of the beautiful things about where we are now is, for all intents and purposes, we've become financially immune. You know, we won a lawsuit. We're out here on the speaking circuit. We're trying to lend our energies and our times and our expertise to what we've been calling the criminal justice system, or the criminal system of injustice. And it's a beautiful space to be in, because through your trials and tribulations, you realize that you've been built and born and shaped for this. And I often describe being placed in the belly of the beast as an awakening process for me, where I said, wow, if I can realize and understand being in the belly of the beast in the same way as being in my mother's womb, in my mother's stomach, I was being shaped and formed, unbeknownst to me, to provide a service 30 years from now or 30 years from then. And so in my future self, I was being made fearless. I was being made courageous. I was being made to be born brave. You know, as many of us, as all of us are out here, you know, Raymond always says, we still got the gloves on, man. We don't know anything about hanging those gloves up, man. You know, we done seen Muhammad Ali do it, and we trying to mimic his float like a butterfly, sting like a bee style of fighting this system, you know, very courageously, and understanding that this is chess and that we have to become master chess players. We got to make sure that we plant the seeds in our future children and the future movers and shakers of tomorrow, so that as we move into the future, if somehow we become Neo in the Matrix and get taken out, that part is only understood by part 3, when he says, you mean there was others of us? I'm not the only one? And so the marathon continues, because we're making sure that we are trying to break generational curses by what we're doing with our lives.
I mean, big bag off for Yusef. I mean, at the end of the day, when you grow up in the system and it makes you become a fighter, we had no choice. Uh-oh. There's a scene in New David Chappelle. Did you watch that one? We're not going to do that. It's all right. It's fine. It happens. And so when you, for us, going into the system at a very young age, 14, 15, and Corey was 16 years old, like Yusef said, it molded us. It turned us into fighters. And so we've been fighting for so long. It's like, when do we figure out that the fight is over, right? It's like, as long as that bell isn't rung, you keep fighting. And we don't know, for us, we don't know when the gloves, it's time to hang up the gloves, especially for me. Now, the benefit is that because I have 4 other brothers with me, that I can say, I need a break. And Yusef can say, all right, I'll take over and I'll carry the load while you rest. And then once you're ready, you can jump back in. But it still becomes business as usual. It's hard for us not to fight. It's hard for us to just let it go. And then once we won the civil suit, people think, even my grandmother, like before she passed, she said, well, it's over now. You won everything. Like, what more is left? But we had to say no, because we got our voices back. There's still a fight left. And that's the fight for our future. That's the fight for you guys. And that's when we start becoming strategic and playing chess and planting them seeds, like Yusef said, to spark that growth that somebody 10 years from now is going to be a person that's going to come up with that brilliant idea that's going to change the whole system, you know, or lead that movement.
So Raymond, just to talk about legal fights. What was it like? I was looking back at the date of the complaint in your civil rights suit. It was 2003, right? What was it like during those years, waiting until 2014 for the case to finally settle?
I mean, very frustrating, because we were ready to go to trial. Like, as soon as those complaints were heard, we were ready to go to trial, and we were ready to do battle. But we didn't understand that the city was going to prolong and drag out the case for 11 years. Even though our attorney said that it was going to be a long battle, Michael Tariq Warren, he said there's going to be a long battle and it's going to take a long time, and you just got to hang in there and keep fighting. And so that meant that for us, we had to endure, not working or having jobs and still struggling day to day, and still have that microscope on us, and still have public opinion where there's still articles being written saying that we're still guilty. So we still had to walk on eggshells all the while we're still battling. And so it was very frustrating. And for us, it started to become strategic once Mayor Bloomberg said that it was a no-pay case, and then he wound up getting 3 terms. And so at that moment, we had to be strategic, the 5 of us. And that's the age of social media, where we were able to utilize social media to our advantage and help put pressure on mayoral candidates, to find out if they supported us and that they support a settlement. So, but it was definitely frustrating in the beginning.
Yusef, I remember when I was working on the state court complaint, we were talking about the legal documents. You were telling me about how hard it was to get a job, that he'd have employers get sent clippings from about the trial, and that was 14 years, 15 years after the trial.
I think that's the important part, right? You want to, when folks see me on the circuit, or if I'm in an elementary school or high school or college, oftentimes people look at me and they say, man, this guy's been in prison? Because I don't look like the typical, as if there's a typical look, Or they say, man, this guy's pretty intelligent for a black guy, you know what I'm saying? Or for a person who's been in prison. They don't kind of understand that what we've been given has been the opportunity to turn up our lights. The whole society was throwing dirt on our birth in such a way that they wanted us to accept it. I never forget, my mother said to me when she came to the precinct that night that I was being interrogated, my mother said, when she got me out of the room and she was I was in front of her, she didn't say, is everything okay? Are you okay? She said, stop talking to them. She said, they need you to participate in whatever it is that they are planning to do. It was direct instructions because she had very little time in order to get me snapped out of this whole thing. And so as I was beginning to try to put my life together, I was stumbling forward, falling on my face many times. My friend Les Brown says all the time, he says, when you fall in life, try to land on your back. Because if you can look up, you can get up. And I had the opportunity.
By the way, looking back now, if your mother hadn't been there.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I had the opportunity for my mother to have an organization back then called People United for Children. She found out that there was also not just a school to prison pipeline, but there was a foster care to prison pipeline as well. There's so many pipelines that are set up for us to fail. You know what I'm saying? On this road of life, it looks like somebody just scribbled off of this direct path, this path that just goes from point A to point B. They scribbled all over it. And we like, man, which way to go? You know what I'm saying? And I thought about this the other day. I said, wow, there were times where I would be so devastated that I would just go into my mother's office and go into the back, turn all the lights off in the back and lay on the couch. You know what I'm saying? Just kind of check out a little bit. And it reminded me of something that Les Brown told me as well, that sometimes when we are having difficulties in life, we pull over by the side of the road of life. And a lot of times we turn our lights off, and we don't even want to draw attention to ourselves by putting our hazard lights on, signaling that we need help. And so we just turn everything off and kind of sit there in the darkness, But it's in those dark times that we find strength. But as we begin to think about and meditate on what's going on, something is sparked in us that we got to keep on moving. We got to keep on fighting. We got to keep on in spite of this because it's going to get better. There's always light at the end of the tunnel.
So can we go back to a really dark period, to the interrogation room? And I know many of you may not have taken criminal investigations or procedure yet. What do people not understand about the tactics used in police interrogations and what happened when you were both interrogated?
We used to get that question a lot. How do people confess to something they didn't do? And we say, you have to understand the dynamics first, right? Here we were, 14 and 15-year-old kids, never been in trouble with the law, never had no dealings with the police. This was seasoned veteran detectives, Homicide North Detective Squad, the elite of the police force, 20-plus years. That playing field is unleveled going in. And then the second dynamic is also pressure. Mm-hmm. People don't understand that when you put in situations, the amounts of pressure can have you, lose train of thought. Can have you stressed. It can have you, for instance, One good example, everybody who drives in here, if you ever get pulled over by the police, you have two reactions. Either you're upset or you're afraid. It's due to experience. Lack of experience, lack of the unknown, not knowing what's going to happen once you go into those rooms, it sets the stage for a false confession to happen. I mean, you have the Reed technique, right? The Reed technique, which is 7 steps on how to get somebody to confess. So it's these things that we didn't know about going in as 14 and 15-year-old kids. We didn't know who Miranda was. Right?
So when you need to say that part again, because that sometimes
we didn't know who Miranda was.
Especially with
Miranda?
young people. Yeah,
you don't
young
go to
people,
my school.
That's lost on people.
Right? so you walking into these interrogation rooms, and that scene is set. And for me, you know, what you see on Law and Order, CSI, the good cop and the bad cop, is how they got me to lie. Because once that pressure becomes so great on a 14-year-old kid, he's just trying to get from under it. So he'll say whatever he can. And he knows he's lying. They know I'm lying. But it's not my job to figure that out. That's their job, to go back later on. And once those facts come in, I mean, that was another thing, too, that kind of helped us. Because Linda Fairstein, they were out there, her and Letta was out there gathering the facts, and they was giving it to the police as it was coming in. So they didn't even have time to really put it all together first and set up their case. So they was giving them the facts, and then they were giving it as they perceived the facts to be to us, which was all wrong. And so, like you see in my statement, I say Stephen Lopez hit the jogger with a brick. But what you don't see is how Detective Hardigan, at my lowest point, he says, Raymond, this woman lost a lot of blood. We don't know if she's going to make it. She had all these injuries around her head. Something had to be used. A rock, a brick, a pipe, something. And it's at that moment that he gives me options. And I say a brick, which later on, a brick appears at trial, which is on the table, which makes the front of the Newsday, right? Which now, into the reinvestigation, comes back that brick has no blood on it. And so it's easy for somebody to confess to something they didn't do when you don't know the facts, when you're under an extraneous amount of pressure, right? Because you're just lying. You're just lying at the end of the day. If somebody's feeding you what they perceive to be the facts and you're just taking it in and you're just giving it back to them, and we didn't even write those statements. Yeah. What 14-year-old kid says, at approximately 1,700 hours, me and 39 of my friends traveled southbound into Central Park. But the injustice here was that we thought that people would see that. We thought that society as a whole would say, wait a minute, something's wrong here. This doesn't make sense. But they didn't. And that's how we wound up going to prison.
Yeah. You know, I think I'm thinking about the effect of false confessions. The effect of false confessions is what allowed the lynch mob to form. That lynch mob was kicked off this was the ad. It's a copy of the ad, but this was the ad. This ad was in all of New York City's major newspapers, screaming from a person who would become the president of these United States that we should bring back the death penalty, essentially placing a bounty on our heads. And what's worse is that the public was not even given the opportunity to be told the truth. The lynch mob was created and formed, and then part 2 kicked in almost immediately. They started putting our phone numbers, our names, and our addresses in New York City's newspaper. And what that gave way to was this whisper being noised about in society. It was a whisper that was trying to get the people from the darkest enclaves of society to come into our homes and to do to us what they had done to Emmett Till. You know, and I think that is so unfortunate because when we look at the criminal justice system, we want it to work. We're fighting for it to work. We're looking at an honorable and a noble thing. And here you have these false confessions come about, and the public eats it up. The public eats it up as if they don't understand that Raymond and Kevin got arrested on April 19th, 1989. That night, they got arrested. This woman was raped, supposedly by a gang of people, but none of the people that got picked up has any evidence whatsoever pointing to the fact that they was even there. She lost 3/4 of her blood. Impossible for anybody not to have any evidence on them. And then Raymond, me and Corey, we got picked up the next evening. Raymond and Kevin were being interrogated that whole time. And it always amazes me because we are part of the choir in knowing what happened, because now when we look at people who are being paraded in front of, the camera, they're doing the perp walk, or, you see a suspect's face being blasted all over social media or all over the news. And we know what happened. The fact that they had us chained to tables, that they were invading our space, that they were lying to us, I remember they said to me, Yusef, you don't even have to tell us. Because I wasn't telling them anything. I kept on telling them what I knew, which was nothing compared to what they wanted me to say.
They told you that your fingerprint or
This is what they said. They said, Yusef, you don't have to tell us anything. Your fingerprints, we found your fingerprints on the jogger's outfit. And I was so naive at the time.
15 years old.
15 years old, I was living in the Matrix. How did they take my fingerprints? Did I touch something? Like, how did they, was this Mission Impossible kind of thing? They said, oh, we got it. And I'm thinking about it from that perspective. And I remember watching this movie. It's called Safe House. Denzel Washington, 15 minutes into the film, he gets locked up. He gets caught. I'm like, what kind of film is this? He get caught 15 minutes in? This is Denzel, But the important thing about it was that he was being asked a question. They wanted him to give the information to them, and he was refusing. They said, it's okay, They looked at each other and gave each other the nod. And he said, that looks like 1,600 count. You need at least so-and-so and such and such. I said, 1,600? What the heck is he talking about? Now I got a little bit of money. I know what threat count is like. So I understand what he was talking about. But essentially what he was trying to let them know was that if the conditions are correct, if the tools that you are going to use to torture me into confessing are correct, I am going to break. But if the conditions are not correct, you're wasting your time. And sure enough, as those of us who've seen the movie start waterboarding him, and he kind of mocks them afterwards and spits the water out and asks them, how long was that? And then all hell breaks loose. But it's the notion and understanding that anybody can break under pressure. I remember when I was in prison, one of the sheikhs used to come in and he said, man, prison in America is not as rough. It's rough, but it's not as rough as prison in other countries. He said people can go in one day and come out crazy the next day. They said if they want to cause you to confess to something, they said you don't have to tell us nothing. They bring your family in. They bring your babies in. They strip them naked and slather them down with animal fat and sick, hungry dogs on them. Any one of us would say anything to get our families out of that condition. And then they parade us in front of this thing saying, hey, this is the criminal justice. I was going to say criminal system of injustice. This is the criminal justice system. They want to tell you it's the criminal justice system. When codified in the founding documents of this country is the 13th Amendment, clearly stating that if you get arrested for a crime, we can turn you back into a state of slavery. The only people that vibrate with that word differently are black and brown folks, Yeah.
I want to turn to what it was like to be on trial for something that he didn't do. And which is, there's a lot there. And you had your lawyers, and you were up against this team of prosecutors and against the media. If you could reflect back, and obviously there are the two separate trials with Wise and Richardson tried separately. Mm-hmm. Yusef, it was really hard for me to read this in the transcripts. You testified at the trial.
Yeah.
And said, look, I never confessed to that detective. And Santana, Raymond, you had to sit and watch this unfolding in the courtroom.
Yeah. I mean, it had its ups and downs, a lot of downs. We remain hopeful. I mean, we try to do everything in our power. Even Yusef to get on the stand. We didn't want him to get on the stand, but he felt like, if I can get on the stand, it can change the dynamic. It can show people who he really is as a person.
Even that, I thought I was playing chess. I was playing checkers at that point.
Yeah.
I thought I was playing chess.
I mean, frustrating to sit there, 3-month trial, to have, hear Bobby Burns snoring in the courtroom.
Oh, man.
To my lawyer, Peter Rivera, to see him talking to the prosecutor, like having these conversations, and they're laughing. And I'm sitting there like, what are you laughing about? Like, my life is on trial here. And
I think your lawyer said something like, don't worry. You still got the rest of your life ahead of you.
That was later on. After we were convicted, he came back there and said, don't worry about it. It's 5 years. You're still young. So it had many ups and downs. I mean, we got a lot of hope from correction officers at the time, court officers who sat in the back with me, and they being behind the scenes and looking at that picture, not being in it, they were able to see. And they would come and talk to me and say, look, you're going to beat this case. You're going to go home. They were more hopeful. And so, I mean, I just knew, like, even when our lawyers came and said, let's take the plea deal, right? That's how bad it got for us, that they said, let's take the plea deal. And at the time, I had over a year incarcerated, so I benefited from the plea deal. And I really thought about the plea deal, and it wasn't until Yusef said, no, at the end of the day, we didn't do it. We can't take no deal. And I had to side with him because that was the truth. But it was many ups and downs during trial. And so, and that was a lot for a 15-year-old kid at that moment to go through.
Yeah. The reason why I said I was playing chess, I thought I was playing chess, but I was playing checkers, was because I remember getting on the stand, and I'm like, because if you remember those times, like if you ever had the opportunity to be in the courtroom in those times, this wasn't just a prosecutor doing her job. This lady hated me. I couldn't understand what they were looking at when they were looking at me. She hated the very presence of me. And what I found out was the reality of what they were looking at didn't dawn on me until like today. Like they were looking at today. They were looking at the future me. And they were trying to kill that future me. You know what I'm saying? And that's the part that's so crazy to even think about. Like, they are looking at me as a 15-year-old child, and they're peeping into my future and saying, oh, no, this is the darkest one of them. This is the tallest one of them. This guy's a problem. And I get up there saying, man, I'm about to play chess on these folks. And they said, did you go into the park? Yes, ma'am, I was there. Well, tell us, did you have, what did you think? What was your thoughts? Did you think it was going to be fun? Yeah, I thought it was going to be fun. I've been in the park before. Oh, you thought it was going to be fun, huh?
And we were all like this. Put it out.
Yeah, they were. And I wasn't even hip to it. I said, well, did you go? Then she flipped it. It was like tricknology right in front of me. I said, oh, my goodness, what's going on? She said, did you go in the park with a basketball? Basketball? I said, what is she talking about? Did you have tennis shoes on? I said, man, we play basketball in our Timberlands. What you mean? And in our jeans. We don't got no, but I didn't even realize that. And so when we lost, and I just want to share this with you. I was going to talk about this. I said I was going to do this last night, but I want to share this with you today. When we lost, I thought that was the last time that I was going to be able to speak. And they had given us the opportunity to say something. So I stood up, and they said, Yusef, Salaam, you have anything to say? And I stood up and I said, yes. And now I was 16. And I said, I'm not going to sit here at your table and watch you eat and call myself dinner. Sitting here at your table doesn't make me dinner, just like being here in America doesn't make me an American. Those were the words of my hero, Malcolm X. And then I bust out into a rap song. I mean, because rap...
We were like...
You know, but that's the thing, because like hip-hop for me, you know, like I said last night, hip-hop, there was always a message in the music. And there was always music in the message. And I was like, this is my opportunity. This is the time. So I stood up and I said, let us begin. Stress is the anger that is built up inside. Rage is the anger that is no longer built. Taking on a sucker that soon you have killed. American free will doesn't mean you can kill. And take another person's life, you live your life trife. I'm a skill builder, so on skills I do build. Creator giving knowledge to this wise black man. Soon to enhance my words across the land. I'm a smooth type of fellow, cool, calm, and mellow. I'm kind of laid back, but now I'm speaking so that you know. Got used and abused and even was put on the news without clues. Some cave clues selling out like fools. Now check it. Who did what and who did who in? Put in a situation that you don't know what to do in. Some brothers go wildin', we're not down with them. Who would have thought I'd have to lock in? I stand accused. Checking the scene from how the situation was. Instead of getting facts, the media made you blurred. Now the people don't know. All they see is the media. They never hear the blame because they're constantly deceiving us. The DA is dead wrong. This is her master plan. This case is not a case. It's just a crafted sham. And then I had the audacity to look at the DA. Looked at the DA. I said, yo, instead of trying to get your name made, it's reconstructing the crime that really pays. Islam, la ilaha illallah, being supreme over Satan, but no man is Allah. Yes, I'm a science dropper on a righteous path, so how the hell could I take a rapist path? Think about that and then think about this. All my friends, it was me they dissed, they're dismissed. Because I don't really need any friends like that. Like when I really needed you, where were you at? I'm not dissing them all, but the ones that I called that went and dissed me, like I was an inch small, like a rat, a mouse, not even a man wrongly accused. Like the knife's in my hand. How does it look? Me clock, now I'm shook. But like Matlock, I don't know if y'all know the show Matlock. You know the show Matlock, you know what I'm talking about. But like Matlock, soon the accused gets off the hook. It's real when she remembers and says, damn, the cops did you in. I stand accused. Just before we lost trial, there was a young man named Yusef Hawkins, as we were talking last night, that was murdered in Bensonhurst. And I chose to take his case and what was happening around his case and juxtapose it with our case, because they were giving the people who murdered Yusef Hawkins bulletproof helmets, bulletproof body armor. Those of us that were out on bail, they said, man, y'all got to get to court. And those of us that remember, it was like hell trying to get in and out of the courthouse, you know. And so I brought Yusef Hawkins' case into the courthouse, and I said, you people stop. This racial disperse. Hey, yo, you seen that kid Benson? He's in a hearse. And so we take it to the Benson-Hurst fields, right to bulletproof vests. We got no kinds of shields. How does it look? They killed a black man being black. It's time we take a stand. In our situation, you saw our faces clear, but not mine. Not because of fear. It's because the black race was disgraced, and for the Muslim, they must have felt shame. But I'm not to blame with the words you bought. The media took our words to paper, the ones the cops distorted. I told the cops truth like this, and then boom, they were smacking my man Corey Wise in the next room. Now I know why the rosters can't stand the Bobby line. They never helped, they just babble on. I used to think the people and cops were cool. And I said KRS-One was one of my greatest artists, right? One of the persons I really look up to, so I had to drop him in there too. I said they used to think the people and cops were cool, but who protects us from you? I stand accused.
Antron was like, they gonna throw a book at him.
Listen. I mean, and it was so crazy though, because you could see the judge's face.
Yeah.
He was so angered and enraged. Like I still thought I was playing chess. I was playing checkers, man. There was
Daily News.
No, it wasn't the Daily News. It was the New York Post.
Okay.
They came up to me and said, "Man, can I get a picture of your rap song?" I said, "Yes." There it is, you know. They took the picture, put it on the front of the post, and on the top of the post, it said Salaam Baloney.
Yeah.
But look at that. Like, I said these words 30 years ago, And I put it in my book of poems. And I'm like, you know what? At least, like, for me, it was that. It was that moment. It was the time where I was like, damn, I'm not going to be able to say anything. Like, they convicted us. This is a death sentence. They're going to kill us in prison. And so I had mustered all of everything that I could think of to say something. This was my last dance, you know? Yeah.
I ain't got no rap on, tell you right now.
Maybe you could say something. I really want to take questions from everyone here. Please.
So we were lucky enough to hear from you earlier with some of the other clinic students. I think this is like not a legal question at all, but as a Black man in America, I feel like there's a lot of purity. You know, if you're 14, what do you tell, another 14-year-old? What do you say to someone who is on the street, who may get picked up? There are these random acts of state-based, violence and oppression. Can feel like a hurricane or a natural disaster, and you can't predict what's going to happen. What would you tell, a young kid that may be on the other end of something like what you all experienced?
Damn, I think the hardest part is that young people today are fearless. They'll go toe-to-toe with the enemy just like that. But my thing is to try to not arrest their emotions, but to guide their emotions and to pinpoint it. I never forget, Dr. Maya Angelou sounded like she was having a conversation with Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela did 27 years in prison. He comes out, and people are like, wow, you're so peaceful. You're so, this is, what did you, how are you not bitter? And he said, I had to leave anger and bitterness in prison because if I didn't, it would have destroyed me. And Dr. Maya Angelou, she said, you should be angry, but you must not be bitter. She said, bitterness is like a cancer. It eats upon the host. It doesn't do anything to the object of its displeasure. But what I love about what she says next is she gives us a direction. She says, so use that anger. You march it. You dance it. You vote it. She said, you voted. She said, you voted. She said, you do everything. She didn't say it 3 times, but I'm just, right around the corner, right? She said, you do everything about it. And then she said, you talk it. Never stop talking it. See, one of the things that they have done as a disservice to the communities that we come from is they've taken away social programs. They've taken away the ability for us to take this natural energy that we have, and they said, we're not going to give y'all nothing. You know what I'm saying? As a matter of fact, the reason we're not going to give y'all nothing is because y'all worthless. And what happens? Some of them start believing that. And so they begin to produce worthlessness. As a matter of fact, you ugly too. So I created a line on my brand that said, I am. Because I found out I am is one of the greatest affirmations that you can give yourself. Because whatever you say after that, you begin to believe. And so if you say I am ugly, you're going to produce ugliness. But if you say I am brilliant, like we was in prison and had to begin to believe in ourselves again. Part of that was us going back to college in prison and getting college degrees. Because once we believed in ourselves, we knew that we could begin to turn it up a little more. Turn it up a little more. And so for young people, I think part of the challenge is to project themselves into the future. To realize that they need to begin to plan from a vantage point where they can't see yet. And that vantage point is in their children's children's children. Whatever they do today in this YOLO kind of reality that you only live once can't be reckless. You can't be, just I'm a smoke it all. That's crack, that's coke. Man, put it together. Let's go. You know what I'm saying? You in the clubs, you like, man, let me drink it all. You mix up. I don't care about mix as long as it's clear. Throw a little brown in there too, and you become mad because you're thinking that life is not promised anyone. And the truth is, life is not promised anyone. And so we got to be like a Nipsey Hussle and start planting seeds into the future. We got to begin to meditate and think about ourselves and our future self. What is my current circumstance going to be and contribute to me as a 50-year-old as a 100-year-old and beyond, right? Because the dash in between your life and your death leaves a fingerprint, it leaves a mark. You don't want to leave this earth without a trace. You want to leave something that says, I was here. And that's a lot of people say, hustle for your last name. You got to leave your mark and say, I was here. You know what I'm saying? And so what I tell a lot of young people is that I want them to begin to think about themselves in their past self and how they are in their present and how they want to be in their future. I want to begin to tell them to think about themselves as being successful. And what does that look like? And then I ask them a simple question. What did you do just before you became successful? And if you can envision that, now you got a plan. And then what did you do just before that, and just before that, and just before that? And I want to walk them back to their present circumstance in order to give them the path, right? Like I said before, they start looking like they're walking around with a Ouija board because they looking like they're lucky, where luck is an acronym for laboring under correct knowledge. That they begin to be courageous and brave. And they look at fear and understand that fear is false evidence appearing real. All of it is to arrest your development. All of it is they're throwing dirt on your birth. They're telling you you're not worth nothing. The only place that you can occupy is a jail cell. There's no other options for you. But like my mother said, they need you in order to participate in whatever it is that they're about to do. All you got to do is refuse.
I seek refuge in Allah from his cursed Satan. There was this beneficent, merciful. There's no God. But let me change this dynamic. We cannot change this condition. Let's first change the concept, the ideology of white supremacy.
Yes, sir.
That's the root cause of injustice in America. Mr. Malcolm X spoke, I think, at Harvard or Yale. This white student stood up and said, Brother X, what can I do to help? He said, nothing. But I'm here to challenge the white students that we don't become lawyers, prosecutors, judges, but you first must understand, how do I deal in a society rooted in white supremacy that becomes the purveyor of injustice?
Yes, indeed.
Brother Yusef, Salaam, Brother Santana, the other brothers, they were falsely accused, mainly because of racism.
Yes, sir.
Now, there's a book by Dr. Andrew Hacker. It's called Two Nations, Black, White, Hostile, and Unequal. There's another book by Derek Bell called Faces at the Bottom of the Well. Now, as a group of young potential lawyers who's going to function in the jurisprudence system, well, you have an obligation. It's become not just a lawyer, prosecutor, judge. How do I look at law based on race and dispense justice? Why T. Walker, who was a protege with Dr. King,
Yes, sir.
he said, I pastored for 40 years. He said, once I understood what service meant, he said, my understanding of pastoral work changed. You all have an obligation to be servants, not just to black or white, but servants to humanity.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I appreciate that. That's what's up.
Right.
That is what's up.
Yes, over here.
Hi, first I'd like to say
Stand up. We need to see that shirt.
Okay. My pragmatic
Yes, indeed. And it's official. And it's official. Yes, yes.
Right. Imagine if it
thank you
wasn't.
all so much.
Oh.
Thank you for coming. I'm really proud of you. I just like to say that. I feel like y'all are my uncles, and I'm so thankful that you came down to talk to us. But because of that, I worry a little bit about you, especially last night, Raymond, when you said, Malaya says, oh, you're my dad. It's fine. You're okay.
Yeah.
How do you each attend to the trauma of what you've been through personally, and also taking care of yourself as a unit? I know a lot of you suffer differently, and sometimes it's more visible than others. But I just wonder, if you feel a responsibility to look after your brothers and how you do that responsibly while also taking care of yourself and your family.
Well, it ties back to what that brother said over there, that we know that we have a service to fulfill. We have a duty. We have an obligation. Of course, our health is main, our family is main, is priority, but and then there's also the obligation to you guys, that to tell this story, to tell you what happened to us, for you guys to learn, because you will enter into that field, right? And like we spoke with the students earlier, we just want you to do your job to the best of your ability. Don't cheat, don't cut corners, don't just go in and say, I need the highest conviction rate percentage, I need to be making $300 an hour, right? Just go in there and do your job. And so, for me, health is definitely important, because we still deal with trauma, right? It never ends. There's not a day that doesn't go by that we don't think about this situation. An hour, a minute, it's constantly on our minds. But we also understand, for me, that this is part of the therapeutic process, to sit here in front of you today and tell my story. So if there's any psychology majors in here, don't send me no invoice. or a diagnosis. You need this type of medication. So that helps also with us. We're extremely active. We have to be. I mean, Yusef have 10 kids. All right? So, he has to be active. He has to take his health serious.
Oh, yeah.
But we also
playing my part, by the way. God said, "Be fruitful and multiply." So. But, health is extremely, because we know that also, like you said, the marathon continues. This isn't a sprint. It's for the long haul. So we definitely take that into consideration. But one thing for me is, like, even with Antron now, he's now starting to seek some type of counseling, right? Because he understands that he still carries a lot. He still carries a lot of weight. And we have we talked this morning, right? And every time we talk, it's about letting go. It's about enjoying the moment. I wish that he can come on the circuit and see this, right? Because if he doesn't see it, then he doesn't believe it. Like, I'll tell him about last night, and he's like, man, you lying. And then I got to send him the photos. That's the proof that I have. But for him, now, he's starting to see that too. Like he says, Raymond, I don't want life to go by and then I can't do anything, and then I got to look back and I didn't enjoy it, right? I want to enjoy something out of this life. And so when it comes to, like, the mental and the health, that is very important. It is. I was asked that question. I think Oprah asked that question, and I talked about meditation. Coupled with meditation was prayer, because at the end of the day, you have to seek help from the most highest power in your life. You got to give it all to God, because, I couldn't force anything and draw it to me that wasn't meant for me. And I could never avoid anything that was going to hit me. And so when I looked at my life, the beauty of it, and I didn't say this last night, but the beauty of this name, for those of us that were there last night, I was talking about the question that was asked of me: who are you? And realizing that in my culture, in my religion, that we have baby naming ceremonies where the children are celebrated 7 days after they're born. And in that celebration, the whole community begins to understand, who is this? And so my parents named me Yusef Idris Fadil Abdus Salam. I didn't find out the meaning of my name until I got to prison. Because when I asked my mom, and I think this is where I left off, when I asked my mom about it, she said that means boy born with hair on his head, you know. I think I asked her around the same time I still have my flat top, you know. But imagine my surprise finding out that Yusef means God will increase, that Idris means the teacher, the Fadil is with justice, and that Salam is peace. My parents named me God will increase the teacher with justice and peace. And I'm in the belly of the beast learning this. These trials and tribulations are now being interpreted differently. You know, Raymond said, people asked him, would he ever change? If he could have changed anything about his past, would he ever change it? And we've all been asked that question. And we all say no. Because who we became out of that is what we were supposed to be. You know, and so in the reality, the pen has been lifted off of the history of our lives. The ink is already dry. And so for us to be able to see that and to know without a shadow of a doubt that if I was born on purpose, I was born with a purpose. And so just kind of connecting yourself to that source, you know, we do it 5 times a day or more, you know, even just putting up your hands. Like I remember listening to this preacher, and he said Moses went to Pharaoh, and he told Pharaoh, let my people go. And that's what I usually hear. Like I've heard that. And then he said, so that they could worship God. And I said, wow. You know, people hear about a person being Muslim, and I say all the time, I said, man, you know, if I got on a plane and I said, I kind of made a big commotion in the front, I said, man, God is the greatest. Man, people going to be pulling out their phones. Hey, brother, do that again, man. High fives in the aisle and all of that. But imagine if I got on a plane and did the same kind of thing. And I said, Allahu Akbar. Man, Trump hits the whole Trump staff is going to be coming down. You know, but it's the xenophobia of the misunderstanding that this is just a description of the same thing. And so when somebody says, hey, man, I'm Muslim, that means that I am practicing the faith of one who has turned their whole life over to God. This is what Islam is. And so you look at that and you say to yourself, how beautiful would that be and could that be if I recognize that God had a purpose for me? God in his infinite wisdom looked at me and said, what I'm going to give you is not more than you can bear. It's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. But keep on praying. Stick with it. When you're walking through hell, keep on walking. Because when you emerge, you realize that you was born for this. You were being shaped and formed in the belly of the beast, just like you were shaped and formed in your mother's stomach, to be birthed into this world, to challenge it, to change it, to spark it, right? And I think that that's important. And I try to give that same information to the children because they need to know that they too have a purpose, that they too have they have to have a greater vision of themselves than what popular culture is telling them, you know, that you can only be cool and hip if you show a bit. You can only be cool and hip if you bear it all, you know. Some of the most attractive women are those who leave your mind wondering and questioning. Man, I wonder how she really looks. But if you show it all, there's no question. You know, then the outcome is often disastrous. And so in my 10 children, I got 7 girls. I got 3 boys. You know? So it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. You know, but the thing about it, like I said, is that we've been given life. And now we have to humble ourselves and realize, how do we plug into the source? because then we look like we doing magic. And it's not magic. It's just that the favor of God is upon you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. We're, I think, yeah, we have a class coming into this room, but we can all talk outside and,
Yeah.
and I know there are
we
people
got a few moments, and I got some books if anybody want to grab them.
and I know there are people next door who would love to come say hello too. But we do have to let the students, thank you for meeting with our students. Thank you for